drawing a bat is easier than you think, and I'm going to show you exactly how you can do it no matter your skill level. Hello wonderful people, it's Genevieve, and my goal here on this channel is to teach you all about illustration and design. So if you're new, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss any of the weekly videos and so that you can join our wonderful creative community. And with that said, grab your drawing tools and let's get started. So as usual, we are going to start by creating a new canvas so we have somewhere to draw. For reference, these are the dimensions of my own canvas, but make sure you pick something that works for your own project requirements. If you're not exactly sure how to know that, well, I have a video in which I teach you everything you need to know in order to pick a canvas size, so we'll link that in the description below. Another thing I want to show you as well, I've been getting a lot of questions how to get this kind of little floating image at the top. Simply click on the wrench icon at the top and then select canvas, and you're going to have the reference option right there that you can activate, and then you can select if you want to see the canvas or an image. So in that case you would pick image and then put the reference image right there. Once that is done, we're going to create a layer for the sketch. So just in the layer panel, click the little plus icon and then rename this new layer to sketch. And in terms of color, you can use whatever you want because we're not going to see this sketch in the final result. I personally like to go with a pretty neutral gray. Now in this video, I'm always going to be suggesting two different brushes. One is going to be a free brush that comes with Procreate. It's going to allow you to follow just fine. And the other brush is going to be a brush from my Ultimate Illustration bundle. And this brush is going to probably save you quite a fair bit of time, as well as just make everything easier and look more professional. That being said, it is definitely not essential. Like I was saying, you can follow along without them. But if you want to check them out, they will be linked in the description below, and there's always a special promo code for the YouTube people. Now for the sketch, since we're not going to see it in the final result, the brush really doesn't matter as well. If you have only the free brushes from Procreate, you can go in the sketching panel and pick the HB pencil. That's one I would definitely recommend. It works really, really well. Otherwise, if you have the illustration brushes, go ahead and pick the sketching brush, of course. And we're going to start with a very, very rough sketch, just mapping out where everything is going to be. So we're going to draw a horizontal line for the ground. And then I'm going to draw two basic circles for the main shapes of the bat. So one for the body. It's going to be slightly elevated from the basic line because we're going to have the legs later. And then the one that is going to be pretty much the same size for the head. And the last circle we're going to draw is going to be for the pumpkin. So again, same size, just different location, obviously. Now here we can see that the bat is slightly leaning forward. It's like it's scaring the pumpkin a little bit. So we're going to draw an invisible line from the point where the two circles connect to the ground, and that's where we're going to draw the oval for the leg. So that way we're going to get this feeling that the bat is actually balanced on this one leg. You're also going to draw another oval for the other leg. This one is going to be kind of kicking behind the bat, so something a little bit like this. And from there, we can go ahead and refine this shape a little bit. So we can add the arms. The arms, I'm not exactly sure how to, explain what this shape is. It's kind of a worm, I guess. I don't know, like that. It's like a wobbly arm. I don't know, something like this. And we're also going to be able to refine the actual shape of the body so that it's not just a circle. For example, I want the front of the body to be more of an S-curve. That way we can feel that the bat is in a movement, like it's kind of leaning forward. So you can refine it that way. And you can also refine the back so that it has a bit of a thicker neck. So just kind of playing with your lines here. And there's really no right or wrong way to draw your sketch. It's really up to what you want to do. You don't have to do exactly the same way as I am doing, and that's the beauty of sketching like this as opposed to kind of going straight for the colors. You get to kind of change your character based on what you're feeling. So if you don't like what I'm doing, totally go ahead and do your own thing. That's totally okay. So what I like to do as well at this point is kind of mapping out the nose with a super rough rounded rectangle. And depending on the kind of bat that you want to draw, I like this kind of bat that has this super big nose with kind of an M shape at the top, like two little points. I don't know, I just think they're really funny, really cute. So that's what I'm doing, but you could draw a different kind of nose without the little M at the top. You can also draw the eye and the mouth. Since I'm pretending that my bat is kind of scaring or just, I don't know, it's making this scary face at the pumpkin. I draw a very big open mouth with a little tooth and then like a pretend angry eyebrow or something. So here again, you can play with the facial expression depending on the story you want to tell. I'm going with like a little spook Halloween feel. And for the ears, this is super important. You want to have really large or long pointy ears at the top, so something a little bit like this. And yeah, that's really it for the bat, honestly. For the pumpkin, you want to refine your circle so that it's not quite as much of a circle. For example, you might want to squish the base a little bit so it doesn't look like it's about to roll away. You know, you look like it is sat onto the ground. And you can add any other detail you might want, so like the little beach ball kind of patterns on the pumpkin, the stalk, maybe even some leaves. Anything you want on your pumpkin, you're going to add on your sketch at this point to roughly map it out. If you want to have any kind of face carved into your pumpkin, this is also when you would do it. So I want my pumpkin to look a little bit scared, which means I'm going to have a really wide open mouth with the corners of the mouth slightly pointing downwards and not quite as sharp. So it's more like a rounded mouth, if that made sense. Great, so once you have your rough sketch, you can go ahead and use the arrow tool at the top to make sure it is exactly where you want it to be in your canvas. So for that, yeah, just use the arrow tool, and if you need to resize it, make sure that you set the option to uniform at the bottom, otherwise you're going to distort it or change the proportions, and that's not what we want at this point. So uniform, and then you can use the handles, the blue handles on the corners. Once you're happy with the positioning, we're going to refine the sketch and kind of correct any mistake that we might have made. So for that, you can either keep the sketch as it is right now and then create a new layer above it and rename this one to Clean Sketch. And if that's what you want to do, you're going to pick a darker color for your brush. What I personally like to do is just lower the opacity of my original rough sketch until I can just barely see it, and then keep drawing with the same color. Again, that's totally a personal preference. We're not going to see the sketch, the final result, so seriously, it really doesn't matter. Once you have that, we're also going to flip the sketch so that we kind of get a fresh look on it. So selecting your base sketch layer here, the rough sketch, the arrow tool, and clicking flip horizontal like this. So this mirrors the sketch, and automatically you're going to see things that are not quite right. So use this time to not only go over and choose your line. So from all the crazy sketch line that you've drawn on the rough sketch, now you can go ahead and pick which one you actually want to go with for the final illustration. But also go ahead and kind of question your lines, question the shapes, and if needed, just change them. This is why we want to flip the sketch. We want to get this fresh look that otherwise, you know, when you leave a piece of paper with your sketch on a table or something like that, or if you leave your iPad away for a few hours, a few days, when you come back, you look at it and it's quite often you're just like, ew, that's not as good as I remembered it to be. So just flipping the sketch allows you to get this new fresh look without having to get away from illustrations for that long, which, you know, we don't always have the time to get away from it. So just flipping your sketch, make sure to go over your lines, pick which ones you want, add any kind of details you might. For example, here I noticed that I didn't draw the wings, which is super important on the bat. So just kind of add those, make sure that everything is what you want it to be, and then I'm going to move on to the colors. So at this point, feel free to pause the video. I'm going to speed up my video so you can still have a reference if you want to watch it. And then, yeah, we're going to meet in the next step. Awesome! So if you've made it this far, this was the hardest part, so everything from now on should be a piece of cake. We're going to start by changing the blending mode of our sketch layer to multiply, which is the first one, and then we're going to lower the opacity around, I don't know, 30, 40, 50%, whatever you're comfortable with. Having the sketch at multiply is going to help us see the sketch really well, whatever the color is behind it, while still not having it super dark, which just becomes a little bit overwhelming. Once that is done, go ahead and create a new layer and put it below the sketch. This one you're going to rename it to Bat, and you're going to set the blending mode to normal as well as the opacity, just keep it at 100%. Now, I really encourage you to pick your own colors, because that's really super good practice for when you create your own illustrations. That being said, I created a color palette that if you want to just follow along what I'm doing, you can download it. It is totally free. I will link it in the description below, and the X codes are always going to be on the screen. So we're going to start with this kind of super light brown grayish color. And we're going to go with either in the airbrushing panel, the hard brush, making sure that the opacity is at 100%, or if you have the illustration bundle, go ahead and pick the base round brush. Because all we're going to do here is we're going to create a silhouette of our character, so we want to have a brush that doesn't have any texture to it. And seriously, here we're really just going to draw the outlines and then filling them in. So make sure that your outlines are exactly how you want them to be. That is a super important step. It's not really difficult, but it is very, very important. So take all the time you need to create really nice outlines, and then we're simply going to fill them in and move on from there. And with that, it is time for the secret password. So if you've watched this far in the video, please go ahead and comment Halloween. I know it might sound strange, especially if you're new on the channel. You might be like, what's the deal with the secret password? Well, we've been doing this for months now and people really, really like it. Basically, in every video, I hide a secret word, and if you've watched to this point, you just comment it. So super simple, but it gives me a lot of insight into how to edit and pace my videos better, which helps me create better tutorials for you guys, which ultimately that's what we want. And it's also really cool because you guys know me. You see my face in the intro, you hear my voice throughout the entire video, but I have no idea who you guys are. And whenever you leave a comment, I get to see either your name, either sometimes even your face. And yeah, it's just super cool to see the wonderful creative community that we're building here on the channel. So just leave a comment with the word Halloween, and then we're going to keep going. Once we have our silhouette, we're just going to do the same thing for the pumpkin. So creating a new layer, renaming it to Pumpkin, picking an orange color, whatever you want. It could also be like a yellow or green pumpkin if that's what you like. I want to go with a traditional, just orange pumpkin. And with the same brush, we're going to do the same thing. So creating an outline that we're then going to fill in. Now, since the pumpkin is not the main element illustration, I don't bother drawing everything on separate layers, so I'm going to draw the stalk and the leaves on the same layer, so picking a chocolate brown for the stalk, something super simple like this, and then a kind of a grayish green for the leaves, I guess. I think in this illustration overall, most of the colors are more grayish as opposed to super saturated. It kind of gives this spooky Halloween feel. That being said, once more, if you want to use your own colors, please, please, please do so. I really encourage you to experiment and find what you personally like for your own illustration. Once that is done, we can now go ahead and set the background color. So I'm going to go with something super, super dark. I'm going to go with this kind of, whoa, this is way too dark. We can't even see it on the screen. If you're drawing and not filming it, I recommend that you either use a super dark color like the one that is in the color palette. But since I'm filming, my camera is just not having this dark, so I'm making it a little bit darker. Kind of a purplish, grayish, bluish, dark color overall. We're also going to start mapping out the different areas or different body parts of the bat, I guess. So creating a new layer above the bat layer below the pumpkin layer. This one we're going to rename it to Nose. And for the nose, I'm actually going to pick a grayish pink color. So something a little bit like this. And you know the drill by now. We're just going to simply outline the shape of the nose and then fill it in. So nothing complicated. We just need to take the time to do it well. Now we're going to draw the wings on a separate layer because we really want to be able to lower the opacity so that we have some transparency in the wings. So creating a new layer above the nose below the pumpkin, renaming it to wings, and then clicking on the N right here to lower the opacity. I'm gonna set it at 90% for now, but you can always tweak it to find something that you like yourself. Now for the colors of the wings, I'm gonna go with just a really kind of dark charcoal gray, something a little bit like this. You want to make sure that your color is dark enough because since the opacity is not, 100%, you want to make sure that you have a good color, basically, that the color is visible even if you lower the opacity. But still here, the same thing we're doing, we're creating the outline and then just dragging the color over to fill it in. Nothing crazy here, we just have a little bit of transparency. So that's it. Do that for both wings. And then we're going to be ready to move on and add some of the details, the facial features, and really bring this illustration to life. Awesome, so at this point we're going to start, like I was saying, bringing the details in to make this look way less crazy than it does right now. But before that, we might want to group our layers for the bath, so just swiping the layers towards the right and then clicking on the group option at the top and renaming the group to bath. Now we're going to create a new layer for the facial features so that we can easily move them around. So this new layer, well, we're going to rename it to face or something like that. You could rename it to eyes and mouth. I think face is a pretty good name. And we're going to put it below the nose and above the bat. That way it's going to be visible, of course, but also going to be hidden by the nose because as you can see, the mouth is kind of going under the nose. So anyway. For the brush, you can use in the sketching panel the 6B pencil, or if you have the illustration bundle, go ahead and pick the outlines brush. And for the color, you're going to pick a super dark gray with a little bit of purple, kind of like the background, but just darker. And you're going to simply go over the eyes and the mouth. So the mouth, you can see here, like I was saying, I'm going with this crazy kind of spooky shape with a little teeth because bath is really important. I keep saying bath like a bath, like to take a bath in the bat. I don't even know what I was saying anymore. I'm sorry, guys. It's a weird day. It's a Friday when I'm recording this, and you can tell I'm in Friday brain mode. But yeah, you just draw the facial features, basically, as well as a nice little pointy teeth. That's what I was saying. Pointy tooth. Gosh. So that it's bat-like. And I also like to use the same color as the nose to draw a little spiral on the cheek. I don't know. There's no reason for that other than I think it's cute. So feel free to do it as well if you want to. Now the beauty on drawing on a separate layer is that you can always use the selection tool here at the top, setting it to freehand and making sure that the color fill option is deactivated to select any kind of facial feature you want and then move it with the arrow tool without having to erase or redraw anything. So that's really just super helpful. We're also going to create a new layer above everything within the bat group, and this one we're going to rename it to details, and it's just going to be the general details of the body, so all the outlines and anything else we might want to add. And we're going to go back to the color we used for the facial features, so a super dark grayish with a little bit of purple in it. And here there's really no rule. All we want to do is create the main kind of outlines and just separate the different body parts that for now are just kind of merged into one blob. It can be helpful to lower the opacity of your sketch, otherwise you can not necessarily see super well what you're drawing at this stage, so lower it until you can barely see it, but just enough so you can still see the different body parts, if that makes sense. And here, really, you can draw any kind of outline you want. If you want to have a solid black kind of comic book style outline, you can do that. I prefer an outline that is colored and that has a little bit more of a sketch feel to it. But again, here, total personal preference, feel free to go with whatever you want. But at this stage, don't worry about the color of the outline. Just outline everything that is related to your bat with the same, I said bath again, everything that is related to your bat with the same color. And then later I'm going to show you a trick to recolor your outlines. And here it's really I mean, this step is super important. It's not complicated, but it's really important you take all the time you need in order to get it right. So I'm gonna stop talking to let you focus because I feel like I'm just being more confusing than anything at this point. I'm gonna speed up my video. Feel free to either pause it or keep it in the background if you want to have a reference, and then we're gonna meet when we have the outlines for the bat. Awesome, so once you have your outlines for the bat, we're going to recolor a few of them, especially for the nose, because right now it looks a little bit too intense. And for that, we're going to swipe our details layer with 2 fingers towards the right, which is going to activate alpha lock. You can also manually activate it by just tapping on the layer to activate the menu or to open up the menu. And we're going to pick a darker version of our nose color. So you can either manually make it darker, or you can pick the color that I have in the color palette. And now all you have to do is brush over your lines. So alpha lock, basically what it does is everything we draw on this details layer now is going to stay within the lines that we created at first. So that's super helpful in order to just recolor stuff super quickly. You can just change the color as many times as you want and just brush over, and it's going to stay within what's already there. So just a neat little tip. Once that is done, we're also going to be adding the outlines on the pumpkin. So exact same technique. You know the drill by now, you're an expert. We're gonna create a layer above the pumpkin layer. We're gonna rename this one to details as well. It's also going to be just a normal layer with 100% opacity. And for that, you can either color pick the color of the pumpkin or go back in the color palette, making it darker yourself, whatever you want. As long as you have a darker version of your pumpkin color, that's what you want. And with the same brush, so either the 6B pencil or the outline brush, you're just going to outline your pumpkin, you guessed it. So I'm also going to stop talking now, speed up the video, let you focus, and we're gonna meet up when we have the outlines for the pumpkin. Great, and just like we did for the bat, you might want to recolor some of the outlines. So same technique, you go over and activate alpha lock either by swiping with 2 fingers towards the right or tapping on the layer to manually activate it in the menu. And then you just go back to pick the base color that you want to change, make it even darker, and then brush over the outlines. And now that we have the main elements of the pumpkin kind of sketched out, you can go back on the actual pumpkin layer and shade in the cutout if you have any. So for that, you would just use the same brush, maybe go back to kind of the stock color or dark orange, and just fill in the shadows or the holes, I guess, whatever you want to call them. And with that, we're going to be ready to move on to the background, but before, we might want to group our pumpkin layers so that our file makes sense. So just swiping the layers towards the right, clicking on group at the top, and then collapsing them and renaming the whole group to pumpkin. So we are almost ready to start shading, but before that, we're going to create a super simple background. So go ahead and create a new layer below the bat group and rename it to moon. Now for the color of the moon, I'm gonna go ahead and pick a super light version of the purple for the background. So not quite white, just almost. And honestly, you can draw any shape moon you want. So you could have a full moon. I like to draw a really thin crescent moon. I think it's just better for the composition overall, otherwise it looks like it's a big blob in the sky. And here, try as much as possible to draw your moon in just 2 strokes, as opposed to drawing a stroke, erasing a little section, redrawing it and everything. You're gonna get just better flow overall when you do that. So don't be afraid to undo and then retry again, as opposed to just erasing and trying again and, you know, all that jazz. You're much better to undo than to erase overall when you're trying to get nice smooth flow in your lines. Once you have your basic shape, we're just going to, well, you might want to resize it, honestly. Sometimes that happens when you draw in just few strokes. It kind of gets the shape all wrong. So don't be afraid to use the arrow tool to resize and reposition your moon. And then we're going to draw some very simple clouds. And here we're going to draw them on a separate layer above the moon so that we can lower the opacity, which means we're going to be able to see the moon through the clouds. So that's just a cool little thing. So for now, I'm putting my opacity around 20%, but again, you can experiment as always and find what you personally like. Now I draw clouds with a just super like flat base and then some little, well, cloud shape on the top, something a little bit like this. And here you might either fill in your clouds with the automatic filling function. Here you can see I'm struggling because my outline was not fully closed. So there you go, I just fill it in. So you can do that as well, just draw the outlines and automatically fill it in. I feel like it's not necessarily the best look for clouds because it makes them look super solid and kind of flat. So if you're in a pinch for time, definitely just, you know, do the outline fill in trick. But I highly recommend that if you have the 2 extra seconds, you manually fill in your clouds. That way you're going to get a little bit more texture from the brush and your clouds are going to look more fluffy, which, you know, that's what clouds are. They're fluffy. So just go over and draw as many clouds as you want or as little clouds as you want. I think it's just a nice way of filling in the background with very simple elements. So it makes the piece feel a bit more complete without taking a bunch of time and skills. So that's it. Draw as many clouds as you want, and then we're going to move on. We're going to add a shadow on the bottom as well as some gravestones. So once you're done with your cloud, you're going to create a new layer above the moon and above the clouds, or below, honestly, it really doesn't matter. And you're going to rename it to shadows. And we're going to set the blending mode of this layer to linear burn. So just clicking on the N right here and then picking linear burn, which should be at the top. And you might want to lower the opacity for now around 50%, but we can always tweak it later. Later down the road. So for the shadow color, you're going to either color pick the color of the background or pick it in the color palette and make it slightly lighter. Now you can see, although it is super light, since we're using linear burn, it looks super dark. So once you kind of roughly map out the shadow, don't be afraid to go ahead and play with the opacity. So I'm going to lower mine around 25-30%, somewhere there. You might also want to draw some tombstones, so, you know, just a very simple kind of inverted U shape with a flat base, and just kind of sprinkle them, having them be different sizes, different kind of distance. But that, again, just kind of like the clouds, it helps fill the background with super simple shapes without making it like really complicated, but it just makes it a little bit more interesting. So sprinkle them around, add any kind of information you want on them or leave them plain, and that's it. We're going to be ready to start shading. So I know shading might be a little bit intimidating, but it's going to be fairly simple. Just follow along, you can do it. We're going to start by creating a new layer within the bat group. We're going to put this layer below the wings, below the nose, but above the face. So here I just made a mistake, but I'm going to drag it down below in a few seconds. So this layer, you're going to rename it to shadows. And we're also going to use the blending mode linear burn that we use for the shadow on the background. And we're also going to lower the opacity around what we used for the background. So in this case right now, around 25-30%. You might also want to hide your sketch layer at this point so you really see what you're working with. And here we're really not going to have any intense lighting because it's mostly moonlight. So we're going to use a nice textured brush such as the 6B pencil in the sketching panel, so what you've been using so far. Or if you have the illustration bundle, go ahead and pick either the basic texture or the shader. That's really a personal preference. I'm going to go with the basic texture. And here we're going to sculpt the form. So we don't really want to create any clear lighting situation, but we want our bat to look just a little bit less flat than it does right now. So what I personally do for that is I go ahead and shade the forms on the left side very, very gently. So as you can see here, there's the left side of the head that is gently shaded, then the left side of the ear and the back, and kind of whatever there's an overlap between a few body parts or like a couple body parts, like the arm overlapping the body or the head overlapping the body, you want to shade that as well. So it's not necessarily shading and adding lights in terms of directional light, much more in terms of volumes. So if that doesn't make sense to you, that's totally okay. Don't worry about it. But just remember, basically here, we're not necessarily trying to create any clear light source. We just want to bring out the different parts of our characters. So make sure that if you're new to illustration and shading, you peek at my video and kind of try to either do what I do, or I mean you can do your own, obviously, but it's really much more about the volume here. So it doesn't need to be crazy realistic. As long as it's believable and as long as it's something that you like, then that's good enough. It doesn't need to be complicated. And if you're struggling blending in your shading, that's totally okay as well. You can always use the smudge tool here at the top, so the finger icon. I personally like to set it as the stucco brush from the painting panel because it does have a little texture in it, so it's not going to create just fully smooth transitions. And then you can go over any edge in your shading that you're not really happy with and smooth it a little bit. That being said, don't overdo it. You don't want your shadows to be super smooth because that looks a little bit weird. So it's good to find balance between hard edges shadows and smooth edges shadows. And once you're done with your bat, you can see mine is really simple. We're going to do the same thing on the pumpkin as well. So just creating a new layer above the pumpkin layer, renaming it to shadow, setting the blending mode to linear burn, and lowering the opacity around 25% or something like that. And with the same brush and same color, obviously, we're going to add some shading. Oops, I'm still at the smudge tool. We're going to add some shading. Here I'm focusing mostly on the bottom part of the pumpkin, so nothing super complicated, and kind of going along with the little lines, like the beach ball pattern that I was telling you about earlier, kind of going along those lines for the shading. So now that you have your shading, we're going to move on to adding some highlights. And this is really easy, but it really brings the whole piece to life. So this is going to be fun. And we're going to start by creating a new layer in the pumpkin group above the shadows layer, but below the details layer. We're going to rename this one to light, and we're going to use the blending mode add. Now add is very strong. So for now, we're going to put it around, 15-20%, something like that. And for the color, we're going to use the same color as the moon, so the super bright version of our background, or something similar, it doesn't need to be exactly the same. And we are going to stick with either the 6B pencil from the sketching panel, or if you have the illustration brushes, go ahead and pick the outline brush. It is just a little bit more precise than the basic texture and the shader, so that's going to be good. Because these highlights, we're going to put mostly on the top edges of both the pumpkin and the bat. And the reason for that is we really want to, one, have them pop from the background, and adding highlights on the edges is really good with that. But also, since we're pretending that the moonlight is the only light in the scene, having it kind of glowing from behind kind of really brings this spooky feel to the whole illustration. So super simple here. You just go along and kind of outline your outlines, I guess, that are at the top. And you can also add some little extra highlights, I guess, little dots to really show that the pumpkin is shiny. So just random little dots, mostly focusing around the top parts of your pumpkin. And we're going to do the exact same thing, but on the bat as well. So you can collapse your pumpkin group, create a new layer in the bat group. This one I struggle remembering where to place it, but it's going to be above the shadow layer, but below the wings layer. Rename it to lights. Go ahead and pick add as the blending mode as well, and lower the opacity, around 25% maybe here. I know it's stronger than what we used on the pumpkin, and it might seem a little bit strange, but we want the main focus to be on the bat. So we want a little bit more contrast in the bat, which is why we're gonna have a little bit more of an intense light, I guess, or at least that's what I personally do. Feel free to not do that again if you don't like that. So same thing again here, we're just going to kind of outline the outlines towards the top, or at least what is facing the moon, I guess, or in direction of the moon. You get the idea. It's really not complicated, but I'm sure you can tell that your piece is transforming right in front of your eyes. It's just coming to life and it looks so much better already. So go ahead and do that, and then I'm going to give you a pro tip to really make this moonlight feel kind of spooky and just a little bit more interesting than it does right now. So once you're happy with your highlights, we're going to create some sort of a blue glow to show that there is moonlight and to make the whole piece spooky. So for that, create a new layer above the shadow layer and below the lights layer within the bat group, and rename this one to color light or color or glow, whatever. For this, we're going to use the blending mode overlay, and for now we're going to keep it 100%, but we're going to definitely tweak it later. Now in terms of color, you can pick really whatever you want. I'm gonna go with a super bright blue, and you can see if we're just drawing on this layer as it is right now, it kind of goes all over the place. So you can either do that and be really precise, or you can put your layer above the bat layer and then click on the layer and apply it as a clipping mask. And what a clipping mask does is now everything we draw is going to stay within the basic silhouette that we have for the bat. Now we're not going to be able to get any of the nose because it's a separate layer, but you could also merge the nose with the rest of the bat and then kind of have it all together at this point. Now this is way too intense, so we're going to lower the opacity. Feel free to really experiment with that and find something that works with your own kind of color palette and your own vibe that you have in your illustration. And then go back to our favorite tool, the smudge tool. I don't know why it's our favorite now, but I like it now, I guess. Setting it to, again, still the stucco brush from the painting panel, and just going over your edges so that this glow looks really soft and not super crazy intense. So this glow, you're going to focus it mostly on the top of the head, the top of the hands, and the top of the belly. We are also going to be doing the same thing in the pumpkin. So creating a new layer. I also made a mistake here with the order of the layer. Put this new color light layer above the pumpkin, below the shadows. Set the blending mode to overlay and lower the opacity again, around 25%. And you're going to apply it as a clipping mask, but a clipping mask on the pumpkin, like this. There we go. And here, since the pumpkin is since the pumpkin is orange and blue are complementary colors. That was hard to say, but they kind of cancel each other. So you're going to have to really up the opacity of your color light layer if you're using blue on orange. So in my case, I literally put it 100%, and then I kind of go in and really make sure that the edges are blended super well. It's not going to look quite as blue on a pumpkin. It's going to look more grayish, but you can see on the leaves, it's super intense. So I might want to go back and use the eraser here to kind of clean up a little bit so that it's not covering the entire leaf. And we're also going to add this color light around the moon to make it look like the moon is glowing. So for that, go ahead and create a new layer below the moon. Rename it to color light or moon glow, whatever you want, honestly. Just make sure that you rename your layers, otherwise it becomes a big mess really quickly. And we're going to go back and use overlay as well. Here you can set the opacity 100% for now, and we're going to play with it later. And all you have to do at this stage is just draw a super rough like oval or circle around the moon. It really doesn't need to be perfect because we are going to smudge it. So for that, you can go in the wrench icon menu. That's not true. You can go in the magic wand menu and use Gaussian blur. So here, roughly in the middle. You're going to apply that to entire layer, and then with your finger you can swipe towards the right or the left to increase or decrease the intensity of the blur. So find a blur that you like, and once you're happy with it, you just click back on the little magic wand icon here to exit the Gaussian blur menu. That was it, super simple. Now, I'm not a fan of the intensity of the blue, so going back in the magic wand icon menu, I'm going to pick hue, saturation, brightness this time. I'm going to apply that to the entire layer. And that way, I'm going to be able to play with these sliders at the bottom to really get a color that I like. So feel free to skip this step if you're happy with the super intense blue glow, or go ahead and use these sliders to tweak the color without having to redraw it. And if you want to learn how to draw more Halloween and fall inspired illustrations, I highly recommend you check out this playlist in which I'm going to teach you exactly that. But before you leave, make sure to give this video a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of the weekly videos. Then click on the link right here and I'll meet you there.